As you probably are plenty aware, most of the weapons in the game have been buffed as of this patch. So instead of repeating what every other YouTuber has said thus far, I want to offer you something new. A perspective on Helldivers weapons designs, the few of them that even despite the buffs might not get to see popular use. The underdogs of the Helldivers weapons roster. The underlying cause might not be what you think. So stick around, get some tea and listen for a bit. Let us get started with the topic of balance. You see, Helldivers 2 has fundamental problems in terms of balance, in that it really doesn't have any balance. The fundamental first problem contributing to our conundrum is that due to the PvE nature of the game, it's really hard for us players to gauge what is balanced and what is not. We only know what kills the bugs the best in our experience. However, since we don't have access to the exact numbers, unlike in another game like Warframe, whenever the meta gets changed, we can only guess at what the data the developers have based their changes on looked like. Thus, there's two effects. First, a change in meta happens slowly, as players test out what works and what doesn't. And second, there's a veil between decisions developers get to make and what players get to see. Now, we combine this to another element, the developer's vision. That is, we don't really know what it is. Helldivers is a game undergoing rapid changes in enemy design and implemented features, and thus there's no concrete vision about what it's going to look like when it's finished. Players can suggest changes, but it's not like they're going to ever know what's going to be changed or implemented. Some balance changes might follow a certain design vision, but since players are unable to comprehend what said vision is, they might not understand design changes made based upon said vision. Some changes might be in preparation for new enemies, maps or factions, so it is understandable we aren't told everything what's going on in the kitchen.
Yeah, boy.
Thus, when we combine these elements, 1. Players gauging balance is a slow and ongoing process. 2. Players can only gauge balance based on their own experience and the experience of other players. 3. Players aren't able to see the vision behind the balancing. What we get as a result is a mess. Bunch of nonsense. Lots and lots and lots of disagreements on Reddit. Because what ultimately is weapons talk, in the case of Helldivers 2, is heavily subjective. There are very few things about the weapons and even the enemies that the Helldivers community completely can agree on. Thus too, my take upon what I'm about to say is entirely based on subjective analysis. But still, I think I can tell you a few morsels of truth about what the game gets right about weapons designs and what it doesn't. Case 1. The spray and pray.
This isn't working.
Imagine shredding bugs with a fully automatic drum magazine fed AA-12, with the kick of a mule and high damage output. On paper, that sounds pretty American. But in reality, at least in Helldivers, it's a farce. Nobody, and I mean nobody, who takes the game seriously on upper rank missions runs the spray and pray. The only divers that play with it are loyalists that like the idea of the weapon, as much as they loathe how it actually works. Why? It really lacks the punch against anything larger than a Wilbur. What? You want to kill that brute commander with your gun? Feel welcome to dump a whole magazine on its head from a meter away if you're feeling lucky. Punk. Okay. The weapon description says that the weapon is loaded with literal birdshot. You know, because ducks are anti-democratic. So, granted, maybe it's not intended to kill tough bugs. Well, the tough bugs aren't really what makes the breaker as und P suck. It's the hunters. These little... are your first priority in any difficulty to shoot. They're the primary threat that actively prevents you from, running away from the horde of angry murder ants. When the breaker has to deal with these, it breaks. The recoil makes it hard to shoot at rapidly jumping hunters, and they can tank a genuinely impressive load of hot lead delivered straight to their faces at times. You simply get overwhelmed when the big lads catch up to you, because you couldn't deal with the hunters fast enough. The Breaker as und P is an ideal example of a weapon that nobody knows what purpose it serves. If its purpose is to truly just wipe out Wilbur's, the most harmless critters in the game, you'd be straight up better with a rifle, so you don't have to sacrifice your range in exchange for, more damage, the point of a shotgun. You don't really need to make that trade-off to be slightly better off against the weakest bugs in the game. There's better ways to handle small bugs.
Your brother told you?
Don't do it to me. I beg you. No.
Nothing. You have nothing to do with this decision.
One exciting update this time around is spray and pray. It's one of those weapons that has been neglected. It's been sat there in a corner. It's done its thing.
Yeah.
But this time around, we've introduced a duckbill choke to the spray and pray, which means that the shotgun blast will spread out more horizontally than vertically.
Yes. And we increase the damage.
Oh, nice.
So it goes from 192 to 240.
Nice.
For the buffs the Breaker got, I have to deviate from my original script. You see, the point I was going to get at was that the Breaker spray and pray lacked identity. Using it was more about the magazine than about the gun it was attached to. Without the magazine, it would have been just a Breaker with worse buckshot. But with the new changes, the gun has at least something that's different from its parent gun, other than just the magazine. Just buffing the damage wouldn't have solved this underlying problem, so the vertical spread pattern fix is kind of a step in the right direction. Speaking of lost identities, up next are the rifles, and why they are so divisive as a category. Case 2. Assault rifles.
On the one hand, gold. On the other hand, painful, agonizing failure.
Speaking of magazines,
Reloading!
this thing, the Tenderizer, was added with the Polar Patriots update. Based on the trailers, people were excited because it was, how would I put it, looking like something Master Cheeks would wield. To the surprise of many, the reception was kind of polarizing. Get it? Polar Patriot? Do you know why it felt bad to play with? The magazine was tiny.
Ooh, that's kind of small.
The signature feature of the weapon was higher damage against lightly armored targets, but came at the cost of magazine capacity and reload time. No matter how much you used it, it felt a bit underwhelming to use. Why? Because the Liberator, the first gun you get in the game, is the golden standard of rifles. It has attachments. It has versatile firing settings. It does well against mostly everything. It is the local hot dog stand equivalent of comes with all spices. You get everything you need straight out of the box, and that's great. It doesn't limit new players out of the game. However, if the balancing and creation of every rifle is just making a Liberator and shifting a single statistics column to the right and left to compensate, it doesn't really hit different, does it? The Liberator Concussive has identity. It hits different. You can see it's different. For the other guns, they just kind of hit the Liberator light. category. Same goes for guns that have different ammo, but are listed as their separate guns. It feels kind of clunky. How many different SG8s do we have again? 4? How do they differ in terms of looks? It's just the same gun with different shells. And on the other hand, if you create something really cool and unique, how do you retain the balance without unintentionally making it, or every other gun, obsolete? We've seen this kind of happen with the explosive weapons that ended up being underused after heavy nerfs, while breaker use, the bog standard shotgun, was high until it got nerfed into the dirt. At least in my view, buffing weapons up is a good approach, because if your guns go harder, it implies you're able to take on harder battles. I believe in a mutual relationship between better weapons and harder enemies. But if you'd ask me to solve the balancing issues I've brought up, I can't imagine fixing them. I get the impression that Arrowhead wants to keep all weapons on a relatively similar level, and that's admirable in a way, but I have my concerns. If we just put confetti into a breaker magazine and spray paint the gun pink, is it truly a new breaker variant? What will Arrowhead do when there's like 20 different breaker variants, all needing to be relatively similar in terms of power? Yes, and this precisely is the crux of the underdog issue. If everything is balanced, the only way to stand out is to do something really radically different, like stun enemies, perhaps burn them. Guns with their unique ammo types and unique gimmicks will stand out, while guns that don't really stand out by themselves will be underused. However, I think there's a misconception that this is a bad thing. In a case when there's some weapons meta, and even in cases where everything is perfectly balanced, there will be always crowd favorites. And here, a special kind of player steps in, the literal underdog players, who take pride in taking the least effective option and making it work. These are not to be confused with your average casual player who don't really care what they pick in a mission. The so-called trash diver takes pride in that they take lesser used weapons and make them work. It's precisely the same phenomena as in fighting games, and I think that is really interesting to see. As a player who knows a few breaker, spray and pray mains, this has been always a prevalent thing. It's not about the damage, it's about sending a message. If you like shotguns with tons of recoil, then you should have one, and use one, even if it's not the optimal option. And I appreciate Arrowhead's attempts at keeping all of the weapons relatively similar in power level, while at the same time maintaining a stance that we shouldn't over-nerf things, just for being popular, like the breaker back in the day. This current patch is a step in the right direction. The best way to lift up a gun is to lift up all of the guns, and then bring even worse enemies, so the guns needed to be raised again, and then even worse enemies, and more guns, better guns. Loop this process and we'll have a great game ahead of us. This is my belief. Now, I've yapped on for too much. You're free to go, if you're still watching. And I guess go Helldive or something.